Well, hello. My name is Steve Wright. I am the National Public Information Officer for the Christian Emergency Network, and I thank you so much for joining us for this very basic Public Information Officer training. We're going to spend these next few minutes together to be able to help you to learn a lot about what it is to be a Public Information Officer. The purpose of this course is basically just to introduce you to the roles and the responsibilities of the PIO and how they integrate into communication strategies with the Christian Emergency Network. The training has been designed to orient you to public information function and the role of a public information officer. The PIO in public safety and emergency management, as well as NIMS and ICS compliant role, is used in the CEN ReadyChurch and ReadyCity infrastructure. Now, the key points to remember as we're going to be going through this training today is that PIOs in public safety and emergency management organizations are basically responsible for ensuring that the affected public receives accurate and timely information during an emergency. The goal of the training is to provide you with the skills and the tools that those new to this role or position as a PIO or with limited experience can use to effectively communicate with the external and internal audiences on a daily basis. Now, CEN wants you to succeed in your role as a PIO. This training is designed to provide you with the tools that you will need to be effective PIO as you communicate with your ReadyChurch congregation or members in the community or the media. We've broken this course down into basically 4 different sessions. We have our welcome and introductions, and seeing as how we're going to be doing this online, you can introduce yourself to yourself. And then we can just move on to the next part, because session 2 is really where we're going to get started, and that's the biblical readiness lifestyle. Now, this course is a follow-up to that first that you saw, which was a basic introduction to CEN and becoming a ReadyChristian, a ReadyChurch, or a ReadyCity. And if you've gone through that, then the rest of what we're going to be talking about today in this training is going to make a lot more sense to you. So we want you to hang on, and you're going to gain a lot of valuable information. So we're going to look at the biblical readiness lifestyle. Then we're going to look at the basic role of a PIO officer. And then in the 4th session, we're going to be looking at tools of the trade. First of all, let's look at what the biblical readiness lifestyle looks like. The question that we ask in the readiness lifestyle is really based on what we learn in Scripture. If we look at the lives of Nehemiah, Noah, Joseph, Esther, they displayed biblical readiness lifestyles, and that's what we want you to be able to understand as we integrate this concept into the role of a public information officer. In the secular world, a public information officer wouldn't have any concept of what biblical readiness is. So for us, it's very important to integrate this into the training of a PIO, because that is exactly where we at CEN are coming from. Now, these leaders, Noah and Nehemiah, Joseph and Esther, in their biblical readiness lifestyle, these leaders were all rededicating to God's word and to His direction. They were preparing for the protection of God's people. They were working with others in a readiness revival, if you will, responding with a living defense of the gospel to the world, ministry, the city, and the church. It is what you have already become before any great event as how you will respond to it. And that's what we see in these biblical role models. Now, any crisis always has the same principles, the same needs for leadership, the same priorities for those you oversee to protect and to support through the gospel. And in each biblical role model, we see that they had clearly understood and communicated God's mission, His vision, and how the mission was to be carried out, and a plan to lead others to accomplish it. So as we look at this scripture verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 17 through 25, we see if the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has arranged the parts of the body, each and every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. Now, many parts of the body, even the parts that seem to be weaker, are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable, we treat with special modesty, while our special parts need no special treatment, so there is not division in the body. Again, from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 17 through 25. The network is what we want to share about now in this part of the training, where we talk about establishing a response group. Again, we want to refer back to the previous training that you took on the explanation and the definition for what it is to be a Ready Christian, a Ready Church, and a Ready City. Because in that training, you also saw that there was going to be a response group. So in our network, we have a response group, and we have to identify and develop communication avenues. The first thing that we need to do as a PIO is to prepare. Now, we prepare by drafting a message for generic alerts, advisories, releases, and other media communications. We also need to develop an emergency operations plan, both internal and external, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And then we need to practice the EOP with drills and tabletop exercises. Next, we have to be able to know how we respond. We have to discover emergency and God's opportunity. We have to be able to assess the unique situation and fit it to the EOP. And we have to determine the assets capability, what we have available to us and ready at our disposal. And then we need to communicate response according to EOP and an IC decision. Now, you're probably familiar, and you remember this from the previous training that we had with a broad overview. You've seen this description about the Ready Christian, the Christian response, and those top figures are all of us as believers in Jesus Christ. Those of us who have a desire that we want to help, but we don't really know what to do or how to do it. But then we see the structure, because the CEN model begins with the church, and the church is filled with Christians with a heart to help meet the needs in their community. And the Ready Church has implemented a response infrastructure that enables their congregation to respond based on predetermined roles. This shows the church emergency team that the Ready Church uses to respond. Each role has its place in times of responding. Now, you'll remember from the previous session that we had, just to give you the broad overview of the whole purpose and process in CEN's training in our communities, is that we have to have a church emergency team structure where there's an administration officer or an incident commander, if you will. Then below them is where we fit in as public information officers. Then there's a safety and security officer, and then below us in the structure we see the operations officer, prayer officer, the care officer, the share officer, logistics, and also finance. These are all critical areas of the team structure. But of course, we want to talk primarily about our role as public information officers. So the emergency public information and the role of a PIO is where we're going to spend the next few minutes just looking into this at a little bit more detail and giving you a pretty good overview of what you can expect if you're going to fill the role of a public information officer. Now, first of all, we want to define what we're going to be doing. We're going to define the emergency public information and the importance of being proactive. Then we're going to describe the role and the function of the public information officer. Then we want you to understand the PIO role as it relates to the Christian Emergency Network. And then we want to list the skills needed to be an effective PIO officer and to explain their relevance to the role. So we want to define some terms. How would you define and differentiate among these terms? Now, the terms we want to become familiar with as a PIO are public relations, marketing, public awareness, risk communication, and crisis communication. Now, the terms we're going to be using in defining this training is that public information is that which is collected, assembled, or maintained by an organization. Now, that organization may be your church, and it may be an external organization in your community. It could be the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, or a police agency. But it's assembled or maintained by an organization in connection with the transaction of official business and available for dissemination to the public. Or basically, let me just summarize it this way. You're going to be collecting information and putting it in a very understandable way to be able to get it out to the public. That's your role as a PIO officer, is to collect, make it simple, and then communicate effectively to the public. Now, the terms used here. Emergency public information. Now, this is a developed and disseminated in anticipation of and during or after an emergency to provide special life and health-saving information. It's also to include the severity of the situation and any action steps that individuals and communities should take. Public information can be used to call people to action, to educate and inform, to change behavior and attitudes, and to create a positive impression of your organization. Can you think of any other ways to use public information? As we go through this, be thinking about other ways public information can be used, because it's going to become very important in your role as a PIO. Emergency public information. Now, this can help people make the right decisions at the right time to save lives, to reduce injury, and/or protect property and the environment. It also may instill public confidence in the organization's ability to manage an incident. Why is it important to build public confidence as a PIO? This is something that we in this role have to take very seriously, because people look to us for being able to get the information out. And they look at us as an authority figure. Even though we may not be the ones who are originating the information, if we're the ones who are giving the information, they look to us as we are disseminating that information to the public. So it's important for us to remain calm and also to be able to communicate effectively during very critical times. The external targets that we will be talking to and interacting with are the interfacing with the media, and we interface with the public. The public information officer is going to be using those two primary areas of target when we are working. The external target audiences include the general public and the news media that can be described as the conduit to the public. Are there any traditional external target audiences for the CEN, ReadyCity, and ReadyChurch? Of course there are. External target audiences is the community at large, as we will be giving information to different people, to the media primarily. So when the media comes and we are going to be disseminating information, they are the external target that we're going to be talking to, who will then get that information out to the general public. The internal target audiences that a PIO needs to learn to deal with is that we are going to be advising leadership. And then we're going to have the role to inform and educate as well. Now, organizational leadership is one of those things where the PIO assesses every situation and advises leadership on public information implications. The PIO also looks for opportunities to advance the organization's goals and facilitates leadership participation. Now, an example of that is by setting up interviews with the news media and preparing talking points. So let's say if you're in a Ready Church, and your Ready Church has a pastor who is going to be taking the lead in the process of developing the community and meeting the needs in the community. And let's say the media wants to talk to your pastor about what they are doing. it will be your role as a PIO to be able to give information to the lead pastor and also give them talking points so when they stand before the media with a microphone in their face, they feel very confident that they can answer questions and address the concerns very well, very educated and with great knowledge. So your role as a PIO is organizational leadership, is to be able to help them to be able to do that. Secondly is the workforce. The workforce is a key player in any organization's public information. The PIO informs and educates the workforce so that they can support and participate in the public information activities. Now, you're going to be telling internal audiences what you are telling the media and also let them know what the media are saying. So it's a two-way street for us as PIO officers. We're going to be advising our leadership, and then we're also going to be giving information to the media. So it's a two-way street that we're going to be walking down all the time to be able to get that kind of information back and forth and to make sure that it's very effective. Now here again, we want to cover the role of the PIO. The role of the PIO is to be responsible for communications within and from the group. Secondly, we are to work with the prayer officer to communicate messages and create material for distribution. We're also responsible for communications within and from that group. And we are to work with the prayer officer to communicate messages and create material for distribution. The qualities of a good PIO is one who is analytical, somebody who is strategic, can be proactive, is knowledgeable, assertive, credible, and trusted, can be flexible, and able to perform under pressure, and very importantly, is also accessible. So if you look at the qualities of a good PIO, you have to say, and it's not necessary that you have tremendous strengths in each and every one of these areas, but it's really important that you understand that these are the things that a good PIO possesses. I think some of these, as I look at these, because I've been in a PIO role before myself, is that you do need to be able to be flexible and accessible. And you have to be knowledgeable, because that's what people want. They want information, and they want you to be knowledgeable as you are giving that information out. Now, community awareness is one of the big parts of our responsibilities, because if there's an emergency or a crisis that we are dealing with that is kind of widespread in the community, could be a tornado, could be a flood, could be any number of things, but we have to be able to disseminate information for the community. So our role in the PIO, we need to be familiar with the areas in which we live and we're dealing with. So we need to know the demographics of our community. We need to be aware of the governmental structure. We also need to know who the key players are, the people in the organizations in our community who are most probably going to be the ones who are going to be involved in dealing with any type of a crisis. We also have to be familiar with relevant history relating to our community or something that may have led up to this catastrophe or crisis. And we also need to know the community culture. Now, we also must know the basic emergency management concepts. These are critical to us to understand in each of our communities what those emergency management concepts are. We also have to know the incident command system, and they can be different from one city, one community to the next. And these are things that are very important for us that we need to learn if we're going to be effective in our role. And it's also very good if we understand what the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, is like. Now, you can learn about NIMS simply by going to the website and doing some studying. And you can find a lot from the internet as well when it comes to incident command systems. You can become familiar on your own just by doing a little bit of research. Now, having an understanding of the general emergency management concept adds to the ability of the PIO to effectively interface with other PIOs and emergency management personnel in order to share and disseminate information as needed. The Emergency Operations Plan or Community Operations Ministry Plan that your ReadyChurch or ReadyCity will develop should connect with your local city and state emergency operations plan. And becoming familiar with the expectation and plans of emergency personnel in your community will enable you to have a more effective response and a seamless integration during the times of crisis, which will position your ReadyChurch or your ReadyCity to be able to step in and assist and be the answer, not be an answer, but to be the answer that people look for in times of crisis. So if you would like to get more information and detailed training on any of these, whether it's ICS, NIMS, or FEMA, and what they offer online, here's the website that you can go to get that information. It's simply training.fema.gov/is/CRS-list.ASP. So let's now go and look at what media relation skills looks like for the PIO. The successful PIO develops credibility and builds relationships with the media in a number of ways, but we have to be consistent if we're going to do this job well. And consistency involves providing information and access to news makers. That means if there's a crisis or an emergency, and let's say your pastor is one of the lead people in the community, and you are the PIO officer, you want to make sure that your pastor is accessible to the media. If they're a knowledgeable person, if they are ones the media would seek out to get that information, you have to make sure, it is your job to make sure that they are accessible for the media to be able to get in contact with. You also have to be able to demonstrate an understanding of media needs and operations. It's not enough just to watch the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news in your community to understand those needs. It takes some time and some ability to understand. One of the best ways you can do that is by calling the TV stations in your area and asking to speak with the news director. Set up a meeting to be able to sit down with the news director and go and find out what their systems are, what they want. If you were to pose the question, if there was a crisis and I was a public information officer that you would want to get information from, what is it you need? How do you need it presented? That's a great way to learn. It's just a matter of asking a few simple questions by going in and doing something as simple as that. You also have to respect the media deadlines. Now, I've lived, worked, and breathed in media the majority of my adult life, and deadlines are critical. If you do not understand their deadlines, if you cannot provide the information they need for their deadline to be able to get their stories submitted on time, they are only going to let you get away with that maybe once, maybe twice if you're fortunate. But if you do it more than that, they're going to go somewhere else to look for information. So as the PIO, you have to be really aware of what their deadlines are. And again, you can ask the news director when you meet with them, what are your deadlines? Let me know what your reporters face so that if they come to me asking for information, I will know how best to be able to meet their needs and your needs. And then maintain open dialogues. That's really important because the more you are known to these news organizations, the more they are going to seek you out to be able to get the information, because if they know you are a reliable source, that you care very much about their deadlines, what kind of information they need, and having accessibility to the people that they want to talk to. If you can control that, if you have that as part of your ability, then they're going to seek you out every time there is a crisis, and they know that you are the reliable person to go to. Written communication skills are very important in this position as well. The written communications of a successful PIO is really going to consist of this. You're going to be well organized and easy to follow whatever it is that you write. You are going to use clear and concise language. You're going to use correct grammar. You're going to make sure that it contains no spelling or punctuation errors. Spell check on your computer can be your friend, but it can also be your enemy if that's all you rely on to make sure that you have spelled and punctuated correctly. You want to make sure if there's somebody around who really understands this, that you have them read whatever it is you are about to submit as a news release to make sure that it has all of these things, that it's organized, easy to follow, is clear, concise, and especially spelling and punctuation is correct. Then use appropriate formats and style guidance. And again, you get this information from the news organizations in terms of what they want when they get a news release, whether it's a newspaper, a radio station, a television station, or whatever else. You want to have that information before you ever start to write a news release. And then you want to make sure that you are conveying the key messages. Oral communication skills are also very important. Now, obviously, if you've had a life in broadcasting like I have, oral communication comes a little bit more naturally than for most people who do not do that on a full-time basis. And if you feel very uncomfortable in oral communication, then you may want to reconsider about being a PIO officer if it is going to be your responsibility to do anything on camera or to be recorded. But this is an important aspect of this job, is that you have good oral communications and good on-camera interview skills as well. Because you're going to use sound bites. Sound bites is what the media lives by. 10, 15, 30 seconds, 60-second sound bites is what they want. They don't want 10 minutes of material. They want short sound bites that get right to the point. You want to make sure that you make good eye contact with the camera when you're talking to a reporter, or just into the reporter's eyes. If there's a reporter standing there with a microphone going back and forth, you're going to be looking at the reporter. You want to use non-distracting gestures. If you're waving your arms, or if you're doing this, or if you're doing this, it's going to be very distracting. So you have to be aware of what you're doing with your hands at all times when you're doing this. Know when not to answer. This is so important because they can throw a question at you that you do not know the answer for, and if you think you're going to wing it and sound intelligent, the likelihood is that it could come back and bite you later. So if you do not know the answer, or if it is out of your purview of knowledge and information, just defer and say, I just don't have the information to be able to convey to you at this time. Use your voice effectively. And then you want to be able to engage the audience as much as you possibly can when you are doing one of these types of interviews. So the next question is, what should I be doing now? Well, this is the time to prepare, because if you're going to wait to get ready when the emergency or the crisis happens in your community and your church or your city, if you're the PIO officer for your ReadyCity, if you're going to wait to learn about this when that happens, it's too late. You need to be getting ready now. Do your homework. Spend some time learning these critical things, because you need to assess your readiness. You have to know your organization, so spend some time getting to know who's in charge, what's the structure, how's the flow of command go through our organization. Understand the big picture. Establish relations and relationships with other PIOs and the media. Most all police and fire agencies have PIOs, public information officers. It would be very good for you to set up a meeting with these agencies' PIOs and sit down and just ask them what their role is, what it is about their role they really enjoy, what is it that they find especially hard to do, because you can learn a lot from these PIOs if you spend just a little bit of time with them. Conduct regular media outreach. Now, that can be as easy as just setting up a few meetings with news directors in your community. If you're in a large metropolitan area, that's not as easy if you're in a town of, say, 40, 50,000 where you only have one or two radio stations, maybe a television station, and a newspaper. But it is still critical that if you're in a large metropolitan area, while you may not get to know everybody in those key media positions, you want to identify at least a few key a radio station, a television station, and a newspaper, and get to know those people in at least one of those organizations, that you can be their go-to person and you know whom you can go to as well. And then plan, train, and exercise. Now, as you can see, I don't do enough exercising, but that's not the kind of exercising we're talking about. The exercise that is important for a PIO is that you are constantly going through the things that are so important to you and to the people that you're going to be communicating with, that it becomes second nature to you. Now, as we go into this next session, we want to look at the types and styles of communication and the tools of the trade. This is something that we feel can really help you to drill down and get a better understanding of your basic role as a PIO. And at the end of this session, what we want you to be able to do is to be able to describe the types of communication products used in the public information activities. So as we look at the topic of written communication, the question may be asked, well, why put it in writing? It's important to put it in writing because it supports a proactive approach. It supports your credibility. And it tells your story your way. The last thing that you want to do is to allow somebody else to have the right or the privilege to try and define who you are and what your organization is, or who your organization is, and the key people in it. Because if you can handle this part of it, you are going to be the one in control of disseminating the information that is most important to get out for your organization. You can include visuals for clarity if you're doing your own writing. You may be used verbatim, because sometimes when a news release will come into a news office, a newspaper, radio station, or a television station, a lot of times when they get the news release, they may actually type it up verbatim from what you said. And that way, you know if they're going to do that, they have the information as you want to present it. So that's very important. This also educates the news media. When you are able to write your news release, you are educating the news media about yourself, your organization, and the mission that you are trying to convey. It organizes your thoughts. Very important when it comes to communication, because if you start to ad lib, I can tell you from personal experience that a lot of times you can go in the wrong direction very quickly, and you're going to start circling the wagons, and it's going to be very confusing. So you really want to organize your thoughts as much as you possibly can. And the other reason is that your written communication may be repurposed by another organization. Putting your message down in writing allows you to critique your own work as well. Very important. It helps you to see if anything is missing or if it could be reworded or organized differently for greater clarity and impact. Now, public information written products. The things that we most often are going to be dealing with as a PIO when it comes to writing is news releases. Again, you want to be in control of the information that goes into a news release. Statements. Statements from the person that you are responsible to and answering to, whether it's the lead pastor or some other person in your organization who is communicating. So you may actually be typing up a statement for them to issue to the media. Fact sheets. Fact sheets are very important because as you're working with the media, they want to know a list of the facts as it pertains to the crisis, to the emergency, to whatever it is that you're dealing with. Advisories. Advisories and fact sheets are very similar. An advisory is just simply something that's very short but gives a little bit of information, very critical information, a very succinct way, so that a news organization can do a very short blurb, if you will, or even crawl it across the bottom of a screen on the TV screen, as you'll often see on the news channels. You'll see that crawling information. Well, an advisory is the thing that they use for those types of information dissemination. Also, talking points. When you write out talking points and you hand them to the person who's going to be interviewed, that is what they're going to be drawing from when it comes time to be able to talk to the media. Public service announcements can be something else. And that can be something that you write up in advance of a crisis that can be used on television, radio stations, or even in the newspaper, where you're advising people about how they can become prepared for any such crisis that might occur in their community. Newsletter articles, again, just basically a newsletter or an article that explains what your organization is all about and why people might want to get involved. And then you can also write in brochures, flyers, or other handouts that are going to be used. The verbal products that we deal with in public information are basically interviews for radio and television and also in video productions. The electronic products, basically what we use today and refer to as what goes out on the internet, can be blogs, it can be social media such as Facebook and Twitter. And those are very key elements to be used today when it comes to a PIO's role. In the old days, a PIO basically had to deal with a newspaper, a radio station, or a television station, or all three. Today, our role goes much more beyond that, because not only are we dealing with the local media, but we are also dealing with the social media. So we have to be able to get the information that can be used in these facets as well: blogging, Facebook, and Twitter. It's important that we know how to select the right product for each situation. The product should suit the purpose of the communication. It should target the audience's needs and also deal with the complexity of the subject. The four main purposes of communicating are this: we need to be able to answer a question. We need to inform or announce something. The third purpose is to educate, and the fourth is to clarify information. Now, considering the needs and preferences of your target audience, and again, it goes back to understanding the demographics of the area in which you live, and we'll be talking to the people. So the needs of your target audience will also help you decide what type of written product that you will use and work best for you. And what kind of written product might be well suited to someone with little knowledge of the subject. You have to understand that when a crisis happens, very few people have the level of understanding about what's happening, like a police officer, a firefighter, or somebody in the EMS field. These people deal with crisis and emergencies all the time. The person sitting at home watching television news has very little understanding of what goes on in those situations. So you have to be able to write in such a way that it is simple enough for them to be able to grasp what is really happening. They don't need to know the technical terms that so many of these organizations use. They just need to know and understand what the type of emergency is and what is being done to address it. What might you do differently if the message you are communicating is very technical or complex? Well, additional tools and available to help you with your communication that might help you is the Christian Emergency Network website. There's response groups there. There's ways to understand for prayer, media, ReadyChurch, ReadyCity. And there's also project plans that you can download and get a look at to be able to understand. And then there's document templates for news releases and advisories. Basically, what we're saying to you is that the Christian Emergency Network's not leaving you out there high and dry. We have a lot of the materials that you are going to need to be able to learn the role, your basic role as a PIO, right on our website. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you to get the information you need to do your job very, very well. Now, here are some strategies and suggestions for producing content, because that's basically what our role is. What you need to do is look around you. News events, community events, things that are going on in your ReadyChurch or ReadyCity. Become an expert. What is your focus, identified as a community need, as a ReadyCity or a ReadyChurch? Right around the message of the Christian Emergency Network. Network, prepare, Respond, be aware, be ready, and be there. We really want to thank you for taking the time to go through this basic introduction to being a public information officer. I can only imagine that there were some terms and things that I talked about today that could be confusing, and it's going to take some time for you to be able to grasp the understanding of the PIO role. That's fine. Take your time, but start to work on it, work a little bit here, a little bit there, and you will get to be the type of person who understands and knows what's going to be expected of you when, not if, but when the crisis occurs. Because again, if you remember the training that we had very early on, a crisis can be something as a divorce in your church. A crisis can be any number of things. It can be huge, it can be small by comparison. But a crisis is a crisis, and you have to know as a PIO how to address those things. So take the time, dig in, learn, go to our website, get more information, and then come back and take the advanced training for a PIO. Thank you so much.